Hey guys, Jake here. One of the Empire's most powerful mages dies, and a goddess reincarnates him 400 years into the future with all his power and a busty mom. This is the story of Eftel, who right now is with the heroes' party facing off against the Demon King. After defeating him, all the heroes are celebrated throughout the kingdom. As a reward for helping and aiding the hero, the king grants the sages of fire, earth, water, and wind the title of the Four Emperors, a title reserved only for the most powerful mages. The Wind Sage is surprised since the title of Emperor is normally reserved for those of noble blood, but even though it's only a title limited to the world of magic, it's still being granted to them. When it's the Wind Sage's turn, before being honored, the king lets him know that even though he isn't the most powerful in the world of magic, he will still be granted the title, and from that day on, he will be called the Lightning Emperor. He bursts into tears and thanks the king, while everyone present quickly begins praising him, thinks that his 40 years of magical study have finally been recognized. And in such a magnificent way, years go by. Now the Lightning Emperor, whose name is actually Eftel, is interrupted by his young disciple, who lets him know breakfast is ready. He thanks his little disciple, Merlin, and remarks that it's a great day for training. A while later, we see Eftel training both Merlin and several other children. He has them balance a stone on their heads while concentrating on maintaining their magic circle. Once they finish that, he orders them to cast a level 4 spell. Merlin asks him why he doesn't rest a little, but Eftel replies that it isn't necessary since he isn't tired. She simply watches him with a hint of worry, while Eftel, seeing her expression, recalls that after defeating the Demon King, he found a demon mother and her small baby, and thinks that even though she surely doesn't remember it, he killed many members of her clan, which makes him feel unworthy of the worried way she looks at him. He tells the children it's time to keep practicing the level 4 spell, though Merlin asks him to teach them the level 6 spell instead. Eftel asks her why she's in such a hurry, and she replies that she wants to give her best in order to prove she's the star pupil of the great master Eftel, the Lightning Emperor. Eftel lets her know that the most important thing is building a solid foundation, and Merlin understands, though she replies that she has to hurry. Eftel looks at her with some confusion, but she asks him to forget about it. A little later, we see her looking somewhat anxious at the edge of a forest. She works up some courage and heads inside, making her way deeper and deeper until she finally reaches a cave in the middle of the woods. She feels she must defeat the monster inside that cave in order to become the Lightning Emperor's best student, so that she can teach everyone in her master Eftel's place, finally allowing him to rest and relax. Unfortunately, after a scene change, we see Merlin desperately fleeing from the cave monster since her level 4 magic proved useless. Though in truth, she has no intention of giving up and decides to go all in. She summons the wind spirits and recites the incantation to strike the monster directly, attempting to cast a level 6 spell. She's thrilled to see she managed to summon the spell. However, the monster keeps advancing as if nothing happened. It knocks her backward. And just as she's about to meet a grim end, a huge roar echoes through the area. Turning to look, Merlin sees her master, who looks quite irritated since he has already told her many times to stay away from that forest. Damn, this anime has some incredible animation, or at least in episode 1. We'll see how it goes from here, right? Like the young master here rode the manga's fame. Merlin apologizes while Eftel lets her know that she's his most talented student, but that she's too impatient. And power gained in haste is very fragile. However, as Eftel is speaking, the monster gets back on its feet. Merlin panics at the sight of it, and fear keeps her from speaking, though Eftel senses it and uses a level 10 spell to incinerate the poor wolf. Later that night, Merlin mentions that her master is amazing. Eftel tells her to go to sleep, but as she's about to head to her room, Eftel starts coughing and spits up blood. He asks Merlin if she already noticed, and she replies that she had, and that's why she'd been so eager to learn quickly. He's surprised to realize that's why she'd been pushing herself so hard. Merlin asks him to take care of himself and recommends he rest as much as he can, but Eftel gets up and reveals that he doesn't have much time left, so he can't afford to rest. She asks him why he keeps going, and Eftel strokes her head and tells her he wants to train talented students who will succeed him, just as she will. He tells her that in the past, he wanted to become the strongest man in the world, every mage's dream, but unfortunately, he never managed it, because reaching the top was simply impossible for him. Merlin replies that isn't true, since the Lightning Emperor is the strongest of them all, and that very day he cast a level 10 spell with ease. Eftel simply thinks he understands why she'd say that, though compared to the other younger sages, he alone, the oldest of them, had struggled against the Demon King. The next day, one of his students pounds on the door, and when Eftel goes out to answer, the boy tells him that the Flame Emperor has finished his theory on magical aptitude. He hands over all the details, and as Eftel skims through them, he's stunned, remarking that it's truly worthy of the Flame Emperor, since that theory was believed to be impossible. The boy asks him what he plans to do now, and Eftel decides to put his old colleague's theory to the test. He gathers all his students and puts the theory into practice. First, he places a strand of hair from the test subject into each tube, and they light up, changing color according to each element. earth, fire, water, and wind. The children notice the blue and green tubes glowing, and Eftel explains that, according to the theory, the intensity of the light and depth of color indicate a rank somewhere between E and S. Since green and blue are glowing the brightest, he assumes that means the subject has an S rank in water and wind. One of the students points out that the other two tubes aren't glowing much, which might mean the magic for those elements falls in the C or B rank. Merlin watches this and comments that, although it may not mean much to her, the man who raised her since she was a baby knows perfectly well that she has a strong affinity for water, wind, and earth as well. The current method of learning magic involves practicing basic spells of every type, and after some time determining which one suits you best. But with this new method, it will be possible to know someone's greatest talent from birth, allowing young mages to become far stronger. Eftel asks the kids to test him as well. Merlin tells him it isn't necessary, though the rest of the children are dying of curiosity. Eftel wants to try it because, even though he never managed to reach the highest level of magic, he wants to know if he ever actually had the talent to achieve it, since he worked hundreds of times harder than anyone, far harder than any other emperor. That's why he wants to know if he might have had great talent for some element after all. However, the tubes don't light up, and the boy from before comments that, according to the theory, if none of them show a specific color, it means the subject has no aptitude at all. He adds that it's impossible for Eftel to lack it. Merlin agrees, and Eftel thinks that having no aptitude would mean none of the spirits favor him. So then, why didn't the tubes light up when he's the Lightning Emperor? Merlin suggests maybe they made a mistake with the procedure and recommends trying again, and Eftel, worried, asks them to redo it, certain they must have made an error. However, no matter how many times they tried, the tubes never changed color. He's left frustrated, wondering why. He knows perfectly well that he was always slower than everyone else at learning magic. But now he can finally understand the reason he could never surpass the other emperors. The only explanation is that he never had any aptitude for magic at all. His frustration begins to take its toll, and his illness flares up again. Time passes, and Eftel's condition worsens. Merlin tries to help him, but he asks her to wait outside. In his room, Eftel keeps thinking that he always believed he could reach the highest levels of magic, but he could never break through that wall called talent. With that result, his hopes died. He feels ashamed of being so pathetic. He thinks that if only he'd had a little more time, he might have changed something. But all his effort amounted to nothing, and sadly, Eftel ends up dying, frustrated. Suddenly something happens, and he awakens the ability of a second reincarnation. Now, in a strange white space, he recalls that 50 years had already passed, and that he'd forgotten he even had that ability. He mentions this to a mysterious figure he'd met in that space after having taken his own life in a different world. This figure, a strange, well-endowed goddess, welcomes him and lets him know that his unbreakable ability was what allowed him to push himself to his limit. He finally understands why he could never give up, and now she tells him that the time has come for his second reincarnation, and that he can once again gain extra starting abilities. She asks him what he thinks about doubling his growth rate, but he replies that it isn't necessary, since he still retains his magical knowledge and only needs more time to keep pushing himself and improving. She tells him that it's very much like him, that despite lacking magical aptitude, he still managed to become one of the 4 emperors. And that was thanks to his sheer force of will. She asks if he's ready, and he says yes, thanking her for this second chance at life. After a flash of light, Eftel wakes up in a small body. He sits up, startled, and his memories quickly come flooding back. Leaving the room, he goes to look at himself in the mirror and is immediately hugged by his mother, who also calls him Eftel. He realizes that thanks to his second reincarnation ability, he's now living his third life. By the time he turns 4, the memories of the old Eftel begin returning to him, and now in this third chance at life, he's determined to master magic. That morning, he remembers the method for testing magical aptitude. So without wasting any time, he runs off to try it. Unfortunately, just like in his previous life, the same thing happens, and while he's lost in thought in the garden, he spots an enormous black dragon flying overhead. Noticing its crimson eyes, he wonders if someone must have made it angry. And sure enough, the knights come charging in right behind it. Eftel instinctively starts running, but then remembers he's no longer at his peak. He's only 4 years old, so what could he possibly do? He regrets that if only he'd known this would happen, he would have reincarnated into a body capable of using magic. However, he remembers his own original spell, the one he created himself, level 10 Eftel. When he tries it, he manages to cast it, and a powerful magic circle appears before him, disintegrating the dragon in an instant and leaving Eftel completely stunned, as he realizes he was reborn into this world, able to use the magic from his past life at its very fullest. About 3 years pass after Eftel was reincarnated into that body, retaining his past life consciousness, and by this point he has discovered that he's in the same world he lived in before, just 400 years later. The next day, a blond man arrives at the house who turns out to be Eftel's older brother named Frazier. He then walks over to his little brother and is surprised to see him studying some rather interesting and quite complicated books. All at such a young age, seeing that his little brother is interested in magic books, he lets him know that he'll bring some as a gift next time he visits. Eftel gets excited, and their mother remarks that he's just like his father. Curious, Eftel asks his brother when he'll get to meet their father. Frazier apologizes, though, since their father is very busy and finds it hard to make time. Eftel feels a pang of sadness, since he doesn't know his father, but he knows the man is a very important figure in the world of magic in the Blue Kingdom. The Duke Orcod, who happens to be a descendant of Eftel's past self, that is, the Lightning Emperor. So he's quite curious to find out what he's like. However, since his mother has no magical aptitude, she's looked down on by his father's wife and the rest of the concubines, though honestly, that's just jealousy talking, since Eftel's mother is a real beauty. Since it's a family of mages, and his father's wife despised them for lacking magical aptitude, she banished them to a remote area. He's essentially a bastard son. Frazier feels for him and mentions he'll talk to their father about it, while Eftel thinks about how his brother Frazier is actually the second son of the Duke Orcot's wife, who took pity on them and decided to look after them. Still, Eftel doesn't care about his circumstances as long as he can study magic. A little later, over tea, Frazier asks him what he plans to do in the future with everything he's studying, and an excited Eftel blurts out that he's a descendant of a legendary mage, and that, once he turns 15, he plans to go to the academy in the capital to study magic. His mother quickly covers his mouth since he's talking too much. Just like their mother, he also has no magical aptitude, something Frazier knows all too well, since his brother's lack of aptitude is common knowledge. Their mother mentions she'd been thinking of sending him to fencing school, and Frazier thinks it's a great idea. Eftel complains because he doesn't want to learn fencing, but Frazier lets him know that, believe it or not, he was the top of his class at military school and admits that he originally chose that academy because he wanted to rebel against his family of mages. But he feels it was the right call, since magic swordsmen are quite rare and the army treats them very well. Since he happens to have some free time that day, he asks Eftel if he'd like to give it a try. Their mother gets excited and pulls him into her chest, muffling his response, letting Frazier know she'd be more than happy for him to teach his little brother. Later on, Eftel is practicing swordsmanship and comes to understand why his older brother had been so insistent on teaching him general subjects and military science, since his brother's plan from the start had been to send him to military school. He figures his brother must be worried about his lack of magical aptitude, but that's not what he wants. So he musters up the courage to tell his brother that he actually wants to attend the Academy of Magic. His brother looks at him with sympathy and tells him that some people are good at certain things and bad at others. Eftel understands perfectly well that he has no magical aptitude, but he does have mana and can use magic. He wants to go no matter what, since after those 400 years, he might be able to find some clue that will help him push past his limits. Frazier finally agrees, but on one condition: he'll cast a spell, and if his little brother somehow manages to replicate it, he himself will recommend him to the Academy of Magic. Frazier figures that although it's a bit harsh, he hopes this will help his little brother see reality and come to terms with it. He tells him to pay close attention, and Eftel is thrilled. Frazier quickly begins casting, summoning the wind spirit Sylphield. He finally casts a level 2 spell that manages to cut down a tree, figuring that should surprise his little brother enough to make him understand he won't be able to get into the Academy of Magic. However, to his surprise, Eftel asks if that's really all he's got. Frazier asks what on earth he's talking about, since casting that spell takes an enormous amount of effort. But Eftel leaves him speechless by summoning a far more powerful spell without even needing to recite an incantation. Frazier's jaw drops as he wonders how on earth his 7-year-old little brother managed to do that, since he'd never heard of anything like it before, and only a sage who had trained for decades could possibly pull it off. He asks Eftel what he just did, and Eftel realizes it slipped out. He'd meant to copy his brother, but ended up casting a spell of nearly level 4. Frazier panics, since that kind of magic is extremely high-ranked, though Eftel can't quite understand the fuss, since to him that spell is quite low-level. Frazier asks how he can possibly use such advanced magic, and Eftel, knowing full well he can't simply say he reincarnated, makes up a story about adapting the knowledge and power he gained from his studies, confessing to his brother that he can actually reach as high as level 10. Frazier can't believe it, since that's considered lost technology, and he ends up fainting on the spot. Eftel, meanwhile, thinks that judging by his brother's reaction, something must be off in this world. He recalls that when he defeated the dragon, the knights were saying something about a god having saved them, calling it a miracle. He figures something must not be right in this era, and upon returning home to investigate, he discovers that magical civilization declined drastically over those 400 years. Casting spells without an incantation is no longer considered common at all. Just then, Fraser wakes up in a panic, still stunned by everything he saw. Eftel acts fast though, using his power of manipulation to make his brother believe that what he saw wasn't real, that he'd simply blown up a tree with an incredible spell and a stray fragment had struck him in the head, knocking him out. Fraser starts laughing nervously, while Eftel decides from that day on to study magic in secret and to go along with his brother's plan about military school, at least for the time being. Even though he has no real intention of attending military academy, the unbreakable will from his past life has shaped his personality. Now, the more he gets knocked down, the angrier he gets, and the more he wants to learn. So, over and over, day after day, he spends his time training with his brother until he turns 10, at which point he decides he wants to grow even stronger, well beyond magic in the martial arts as well. Those 3 years of training really paid off, and he figures that earning the title of the strongest magic swordsman isn't such a bad goal. After cutting down a tree trunk by the waterfall, he heads off to train with his brother, who has lately been teaching him to fight 3 times a week. When he meets up with him, Fraser lets him know that today will be a special training session, since he's called in a special instructor to teach him his place. A huge bald man with a mustache shows up at the site. Fraser introduces him as Mr. Moria, a former commander of the Blue Kingdom's Knights. Moria tells him to attack and offers to let him land the first hit. Despite what he said though, Eftel can't find any opening in his stance at all, and realizes this man is genuinely strong. Moria asks if he was only called out there to just stand around. Though it's not that Eftel doesn't want to attack, he simply can't move. Seeing that he isn't moving, Moria charges at him. Eftel dodges quickly, and realizing that raw strength alone won't be enough to overcome this man, decides to use physical enhancement. Moria compliments him since being able to use that kind of enhancement at his age explains why Fraser recommended him. He mentions that he noticed while training him that despite lacking magical aptitude, every time he grips his sword there's mana flowing into his hand, and his internal control is surprisingly good, almost as if he were a true mage or even a sage. Eftel tenses up because, well, the old geezer actually had been a sage. Moria bursts out laughing, provoking Eftel's anger. He figures he could easily beat him if he used his magic, but there's no point in winning that way. He wants to defeat him in a real fight. Moria lets him know, though, that he still lacks technique, lacks height, and lacks muscle. The only thing missing was telling him he lacks everything. But Eftel has no intention of being humiliated by that old bald man. And while weathering his attack, he manages to dodge it, and then uses Moria's own momentum against him, slamming him into the ground. For his part, Eftel thinks his body moved on its own, recalling that in his first life he learned how to do throws. Moria gets up and congratulates him, letting him know he passed the test. Fraser mentions he forgot to bring up one little detail. He reveals that Moria actually runs the military science school and serves as its director, which means that once Eftel turns 15, he'll be a student at a prestigious military academy, and their mother will be proud. Moria makes it very clear, though, that even though Eftel lost the fight, he won the sword duel. Eftel, for his part, wonders how on earth he let that happen. Sometime later, Fraser notices the weather has turned quite bad, while Eftel, on the other hand, is out training. Since no matter the rain, he's always training, especially because rainy days are the best cover for using his magic without anyone seeing. Right at that moment, Fraser goes out looking for him since he just saw a bolt of lightning strike and reminds him he needs to be careful. Since next year he'll be starting school, so he'd better not get hurt. Eftel reflects that ever since that duel, it was decided he'd be attending the military academy. He has no intention of going to the military academy once he turns 15. He plans to run away from home and head to the Academy of Magic on his own. Just then, though, his brother tells him he has some great news, and once they're back home, their mother is overjoyed to hear that Eftel's father wants to meet him. She thanks Fraser for teaching his brother military science and fencing, and for making him strong enough that their father would finally take notice of him. Eftel, though, thinks there's no point in meeting a man who ignored him for 14 years. But seeing his mother so happy along with his brother who has done so much for him all these years, he doesn't want to do anything to disappoint them. So, sometime later, he finds himself standing at the entrance of Duke Orkot's mansion, thinking that although he's really only there for his mother and brother, he's also curious to meet his own descendant. When they finally meet, the tension in the air is palpable and the situation is quite awkward, though Eftel steps forward and introduces himself to his father. His father, however, tells him to just call him Duke Orkot, since he has no intention of ever acknowledging him, as he's brought nothing but shame to the family. Eftel can hardly believe he's being greeted this way after 14 years, but simply plays along and calls him Duke Orkot, who complains that he can't understand how, despite being a descendant of the Lightning Emperor, Eftel has no magical aptitude at all. He remarks that the Emperor must be turning in his grave, and Eftel thinks he actually agrees since he's just met his own descendant, and the man is a complete jerk. He's ready to leave, but then Duke Orkot mentions he's heard Eftel received a special invitation to the military school, calling it great news. Seeing him laugh, Eftel wonders if, even though the man won't acknowledge him as his son, he's still happy for him as a father. He thinks maybe the man isn't so bad after all. But no, in reality, this guy is a piece of work. And he goes on to say it's good news because now he won't have to pay for Eftel's food, since going by invitation means free room and board, and starting from third year he'll even receive a stipend. As long as he doesn't embarrass the family name, everything will be fine. Eftel can hardly believe this man is his father, and that he only dragged him all the way there just to tell him that. Duke Orkot then turns to his son, Joachim, and tells him that, although he let that woman give birth on a whim, people might assume the boy is part of the family. So he wants Joachim to test whether he's strong enough not to embarrass them at school. Joachim gets a sadistic look on his face, thinking he now has the chance to teach that little lapdog a lesson, while Eftel finally understands exactly why he was brought there in the first place. Now, in a scene change, Eftel is warned that even though it's just a practice match, he needs to be extremely careful. Because, hard as it may be to believe Joachim was the best fencer in the school and is highly skilled, so it seems like there's no way Eftel can win and that he'd be better off surrendering, we see Joachim putting on his sadistic grin, eager to destroy Eftel, while their mother looks on, deeply worried. Joachim smiles and tosses him his sword, and Eftel is caught off guard by how heavy it is. Joachim reveals that it's a hardwood practice sword, rarely used because a solid hit with it can break bones or crack skulls. He asks if Eftel understands what that means. Though Eftel plays dumb, which infuriates Joachim, who starts insulting both Eftel and his mother, calling them idiots. He tells them he's going to beat them senseless, since to begin with, nobody in the family thinks highly of them. Their mother is nothing but a woman with no magical aptitude who begged their father to let her give birth, only to produce yet another useless child with no aptitude. He says he'd love to kill their mother for bringing shame to the family, but he'll settle for killing Eftel instead. He offers Eftel the first strike as a handicap. Eftel, for his part, is seething with rage, unable to believe that this vile bastard is actually his own descendant. Joachim keeps mocking him while insulting their mother, and Eftel finally can't stand the fact that these two bastards are his descendants. He lunges at Joachim, who, startled, barely manages to dodge, then blocks Eftel's follow-up attacks, looking somewhat disappointed that Joachim apparently doesn't know how to properly handle a sword. Joachim grits his teeth and blocks the attack, knowing that if Eftel lands a solid hit with that thing, it'll kill him. Eftel uses his physical enhancement and pushes the sword forward with all his strengths, slamming it straight into the gloryless bastard's face. Their father is stunned to see his useless son manage to defeat his eldest son. Eftel, meanwhile, warns Joachim that if he insults their mother again, he'll kill him. He then turns to his mother and tells her it's time to leave. His mother, though, is stunned and asks if he's really her son. He replies, "Obviously silly." Eftel then turns to his father, who looks at him with fear. Eftel simply thanks him for the invitation and takes his leave, while his father, scared out of his mind, wishes him good luck next year at the military school. Back home, while waiting for his mother to make dinner, Eftel figures there's a good chance some kind of retaliation is coming. But luckily, that doesn't happen. His mother makes his favorite meal, but just before he can take a bite, there's a knock at the door. When they go to see who it is, they're surprised to find Fraser and the bald man from before standing there. Oddly enough, Fraser is carrying a baby. The next day, Fraser meets with the knights, informing them that both the army and the Holy Knights have set out to face the neighboring country, which means the Royal Guard is now responsible for defending the capital in their absence. Moria asks Fraser if he's really sure they need to bring boys from the military school to help protect the city, and Fraser confirms it, since it seems the minister's faction is planning to assassinate the prince while their forces are away. Just then, a knight rushes in announcing that southern barbarians are attacking the capital, and chaos begins to spread through the city. Fraser orders the prince taken somewhere safe. At this point, we realize this was actually a flashback, and it's explained to Eftel and his mother that everything happened so suddenly that showing up there was the only thing Fraser could think to do. Eftel recalls that the second son of the previous Blue Kingdom's king was more talented than the eldest, so he became king, while his brother became the royal minister. But since the second son had no male heirs, it was assumed that the eldest brother's son would become heir to the throne. However, the current king ended up having a son of his own, and now the minister's faction wants him dead. The odd thing is how the barbarians managed to get into the capital in the first place, given that the defenses were supposed to have been reinforced. Fraser tells Eftel that it seems their father is involved in all of it, since a change in succession would benefit him the most in terms of status and power. Returning to the capital isn't currently an option, so to keep the prince safe, they need to get him to the army. The next day, Fraser and Moria prepare to set out, and Eftel asks to come along. Moria is thrilled, figuring he'll be a great addition, while Eftel reflects that 400 years ago, the king provided them with supplies for the battle against the Demon King, and for that reason he feels a duty to protect this country. The group sets off, and a while later in the forest, Fraser mentions they'll first pass through Neil Forest, then cross the Moralis Plains before finally reaching the border. Eftel senses something is very wrong though, since it's far too quiet and there isn't a single animal in sight. Suddenly they hear a loud crash, so they decide to run as fast as they can, since standing around would be foolish. After running for a while, the group finally spots the border, but they're shocked to find that someone is waiting for them there. Frazier is stunned to realize it's the Duke's personal division of mages. In other words, Eftal's wretched father's forces. The group tries to turn back, but unfortunately the path behind them is already engulfed in flames. They wonder if there's any way to get the prince to safety, since in this situation they're completely trapped. Frazier figures the only option is to try to convince their father to call off this madness. Moria tells him that won't get them anywhere. Frazier insists, though, that he believes their father isn't such a bad person deep down, though it's clear he isn't entirely convinced of that himself. After a moment, Frazier steps forward to face his father and asks him to resolve everything through dialogue. Joachim asks their father what he wants done with Frazier, and their father replies that since his son wants to talk in person, he'll go meet him himself. Facing his father, Frazier feels a surge of hope. If his father came out to meet him, it must mean he's willing to talk things through. Unfortunately, the bastard walks up and tells him that yes, he's willing to talk, but only to get his troublesome son out of the way, electrocuting him with a powerful magical device. Once Frazier is knocked out, he orders the rest of the mages to reduce his body to ashes. Moria panics, recognizing the spell as the one named after one of the 4 emperors. Level 6, Eftal, alarmed, tries to protect his brother, but Moria holds him back since it's already too late, and tragically, Frazier takes the spell head-on. After the flash of light, the entire area is engulfed in flames, and Eftal is overcome with fury, since his brother was only trying to protect a baby, and he remembers how Frazier had always stood by his side, looking after him. Enraged, he swears he'll make them pay, while Moria notices something has changed in him. Eftal tells them he's about to show them what real magic looks like, and as he steps forward, he activates level 9, Custody, freezing the entire forest and everything in front of him. Everyone present panics, especially his father, who can't believe what he's seeing. Eftal thinks to himself that no one in this world has ever heard of anyone capable of casting a spell like that on their own. And even though water magic isn't his specialty, none of them can even begin to stop it. He's furious, since he'd assumed his father had actually taught his sons how to use magic and fight properly. His father is shocked to realize it's Eftal and quickly orders all the mages to eliminate the enemy. Without hesitation, they unleash a barrage of fire arrows. Joachim smiles, thinking they've finally taken out that bastard, as does the Duke, while Moria panics. But, as expected, none of them are any match for Eftal. All the mages panic upon seeing that he's not only still alive, but completely unharmed. Eftal tells them that something called a continuous defense barrier exists, and that if they've never heard of it, it's simply because they're too ignorant. The Duke orders his magic division to hit Eftal with their strongest attack. Level 6, Eftal, Concentrated Explosion. Eftal, however, is outraged that they'd use his own name for something like that, and easily shields himself with his magic. He tells them they're pathetically weak, then advances, wiping out what little remains of them, thinking to himself how grateful he is that his brother bothered to train him in swordsmanship, since he genuinely loves using a blade. He takes the opportunity to practice imbuing his sword with magic, activating level 2, Riot Bomb. One of the mages tries to strike him while casting, but Eftal sends him flying. The entire division starts running for their lives. Eftal has no intention of showing them mercy, though he does want to give them one last demonstration of what real power looks like before they die. The entire sky clouds over, and Eftal tells them that isn't the weather, that's his power. Since his magic is nothing like the garbage they use, what he commands is lightning itself. He wipes out every last one of them with level 10, Eftal, sparing only Joachim and his father since he has something special reserved for them. Joachim, terrified, tells him he won't get away with this, but Eftal knocks him out cold. His father holds his ground, though still with an arrogant edge, demanding how Eftal dares do this. Eftal replies that they tried to kill the prince and that it won't be enough for everyone involved, including the ringleader, to end up dead. His father warns that attacking him would make Eftal a traitor, but Eftal responds that he'll show no mercy to a wretch who just tried to murder his own son and knocks him unconscious as well. Thanks to Eftal, the attempted coup ended in failure, and both Orcott and Joachim were publicly executed. Sometime later, it's revealed that Frazier hadn't actually died. He'd just been recovering. Eftal is overjoyed to see him walking again, and Frazier tells him he never imagined a family heirloom would end up saving his life. Looking at the pendant, Eftal realizes it used to belong to him, and that's exactly why Frazier survived. Frazier tells him he owes his life to the Lightning Emperor, and Eftal hugs him, grateful his brother is still alive. After the incident, there was talk of stripping the Orcott family's title over the attempted coup. But since Frazier risked his life to save the crown prince, the title remained naturally, passing to Frazier, and following their father's execution, Frazier took over as head of the household. Now we see Eftal teaching magic to Moria and his brother, and both of them are stunned by everything he's able to do. Eftel apologizes for not telling them sooner, though they understand he must have had a good reason, which he confirms. Moria tells him he doesn't owe them an explanation if he'd rather not give one, and besides, with that much power, he must be hiding quite a secret. Eftel agrees, since he obviously can't tell them he's a reincarnator, so the three of them swear to keep the secret between themselves. Frazier figures it would be best if Eftel didn't use his full power in front of others, since the world would fall into chaos if anyone else witnessed something like that. Frazier asks him what he plans to do now, and his brother tells him he wants to go to magic school. Moria is surprised and asks why he'd want to do that when he already has so much power. But Eftel explains that he wants to become even stronger, and that means continuing down the path of magic. Both of them understand, and Moria tells him he'll help train him until he turns 15, since being skilled with a sword is always useful. Eftel thanks him, and so in this way, Eftel is able to continue on his path in magic. A while later, Eftel gets ready to travel. His mother lets him know he's a full-grown adult now, free and unrestricted, so he can do whatever he wants. She quickly bursts into tears and without hesitation jumps to hug him, telling him he'll always be welcome back home. Moved by the scene, Moria also starts crying, though he claims he just got something in his eye. That something must be pretty huge. Eftel finally says his goodbyes and sets off, thanking them for everything, determined to make the most of this chance to surpass his own talent, since he has no intention of stopping until he reaches the very peak of magic. A few days into his journey, he decides it's time for a break and comes across a tea house along the way, or really more of a roadside diner. While relaxing a bit, he notices an old man inside fawning over a man named Edwards, the so-called Lord of the Mad Flames, with what appears to be a slave girl sitting beside him. The old man asks Edwards if he'd be willing to teach the local school children about magic, about what real magic actually is. Edwards tells him to please be quiet and not speak to him without permission, since he's busy reading. The old man panics and apologizes, while Edwards goes on to say he hopes the man understands the massive difference in value between a second of his own life and a second of the old man's, given that at just 20 years old, he's already reached rank A in the Adventurers Guild. Eftel figures the guy is just an egomaniac, though. Hearing his rank does pique his interest. Edwards keeps humiliating the old man, pointing out that at 50 years old, he's barely reached rank C, making him little more than someone fit only to teach kids basic magic out in the middle of nowhere. The old man apologizes and mentions that he's prepared a welcome banquet for that evening. But before he can finish talking, Edwards orders him to shut up already, since that night, he's planning to spend some very special time with his beloved demon girl, showing off the mark on her body. He lets the old man know that her slave mark will fully set into her body that very night. The old man understands that if Edwards fills her with his vital essence too soon, it could ruin the spell. Edward seems thoroughly delighted, anticipating the night ahead. Eftel, for his part, feels disgusted, thinking that Merlin might have ended up the same way if he hadn't taken her in. Just then, though, everything is interrupted when a villager comes running in a panic, shouting that a giant orc is approaching. Eftel goes out to investigate and spots the giant creature eating vegetables straight off a cart. The townspeople panic since no local adventurer stands a chance against a giant orc. The old man reassures everyone not to worry, since they have the amazing Edwards, the Mad Flame, a rank A adventurer, right there with them. Edwards looks quite confident since a giant orc is only a rank B beast, and a rank A adventurer like himself is far superior. The girls in the crowd swoon at the sight of him. Eftel, meanwhile, thinks that even 400 years later, rank A adventurers are still pretty impressive. Edward strides toward the orc, still singing his own praises the whole way. He quickly begins casting, summoning a fire explosion spell. The attack hits the orc, and the crowd cheers, while Edwards remains confident, sure he's just used his most powerful spell. But once the smoke clears, the orc is completely unfazed. Well, not entirely unfazed, now it's furious. Edwards panics, since it should be impossible for that monster to have withstood his strongest attack. Looking more closely at the creature, though, he realizes it isn't a simple giant orc at all. It's the most dangerous type of orc there is, a rampaging orc. Realizing he stands no chance of winning, he quickly decides to run for his life, casting wind magic to create a barrier that traps the townspeople in with the orc, buying himself enough time to escape. The people demand to know what on earth he's doing, and he answers shamelessly that they're his bait, since someone of noble birth like him simply can't afford to die in a place like that. The crowd panics and tries to flee. The orc, meanwhile, gets ready for its next course. It already had vegetables, now it's time for meat. Luckily, Eftel happens to be there and uses a level 6 spell to dispel the barrier. The old man is stunned to see the boy cast magic without an incantation, while Eftel grumbles about not wanting to draw attention to himself. The orc starts advancing toward him. He comes up with a clever idea. He'll make it look like he's only using a level 3 spell, when in reality he'll cast a level 9 one. That way, everyone will think he defeated the monster with something far weaker. Even so, the villagers are stunned, And best of all, the spell wipes out the monster completely. Everyone cheers, while Edwards panics. He can't understand how that brat's spell could possibly have worked. And the old man explains that unlike Edwards' own spell, the boy properly reforged and refined his magic, giving his cast the strength of a level 5 spell. Still, the boy looks like he's only 14 or 15, which makes it hard to understand how he could have pulled that off. Ethel understands exactly why, recalling that refining and reinforcing one's magic is the most basic process there is, and he can't believe that man never even bothered to try it. Without wasting time, people start crowding around Ethel, who tries to tell everyone it was just luck. In reality, though, most of the crowd is actually gathering around the orc, drawn in by its delicious smell, wondering if it might be edible. Ethel figures that to ordinary people it probably just looked like a normal level 3 spell, and he uses the distraction to slip away. Before leaving, though, he walks over to Edwards and tells him to show more respect to his elders, since that old man understands the art of magic far better than he does. And besides, what Edwards did back there was attempted murder, only prevented from becoming an actual murder because Ethel stepped in. Still, it remains a crime, and a criminal has no right to own slaves, so he orders Edwards to free the girl and hand her over to the authorities. The girl is stunned, while Edwards is left in shock, realizing he won't get to do what he'd planned after all. With that said, Ethel walks away, while the girl is left utterly smitten. After a while, it becomes clear the girl has attached herself to Ethel like a tick, refusing to leave his side. He asks her how long she plans to keep following him, and she, looking a bit embarrassed, steps out from where she'd been hiding and tells him she wants his help. Ethel asks what kind of help she needs, and she tells him she wants him to become her master. Ethel, flustered, doesn't quite know how to respond. The girl explains that if things keep going the way they are, she'll be arrested as a runaway slave. Ethel understands, since a slave mark doesn't come off easily, even without an owner, and a slave without a master is left free for anyone to claim. If someone else, some other degenerate, ends up claiming her instead of Ethel, her fate could turn out far worse. The girl tells him he seems like a good person and that she has no doubt he's 1,000 times better than that other man. Ethel grants her that point, though. Out of curiosity, he asks how a demon ended up enslaved in the first place. The girl explains that her clan has historically been enslaved by humans ever since they lost a war against the human nations long ago. Ethel understands, knowing that once someone becomes a slave, it takes an enormous amount of paperwork to actually be freed. And as cruel as it sounds, that's just how the world works. The girl reveals that, hard as it may be to believe, she's actually descended from demon royalty. In fact, she turns out to be a distant relative of Merlin, the headmistress of Altina, the prestigious Academy of Magic. Ethel is stunned and asks her to repeat what she just said, referring to Merlin. The girl confirms she's talking about the very same Merlin, the girl raised by the Lightning Emperor who is now the most powerful demon mage alive. Ethel breathes a sigh of relief, realizing that after 400 years, his beloved Merlin managed to make a name for herself and is now the headmistress of the Magic Academy. He starts laughing, overjoyed, remarking that 400 years have passed, and demons sure do live a long time. He agrees and lets the girl know he'll become her master, just for a while. She's overjoyed while Ethel thinks to himself that he simply can't leave a relative of Merlin suffering like that. He asks for her name and she introduces herself as Anastasia. A while later, at sunset, they finally arrive at the city. Anastasia asks what they're doing there, and he explains that his entrance exam for the academy will take place there the next day. The girl is surprised he still wants to enroll when he's already so powerful. Before Ethel can go off looking for an inn, though, the girl's stomach growls loudly, so they head to a restaurant first. The thing is, Ethel doesn't want to skimp on expenses, so they end up at a rather upscale restaurant, since, in his words, you need to eat plenty of meat before an important day. The butler greets them, though he eyes them with a bit of skepticism. He eventually leads them to their table, but everyone starts staring at Anastasia as though she's nothing more than a filthy slave. Once seated, Ethel wonders where Anastasia went, and looking beside him, notices she's sitting on the floor like a dog. He tells her to sit at the table already. Anastasia, surprised, asks if someone like her really deserves to sit at a table meant for humans. And whether he's sure about that, he confirms it. She lets him know, though, that slaves are supposed to kneel beside their master so they can respond immediately to their needs. Ethel tells her he doesn't care what she's supposed to do, and asks her to just sit down already. Anastasia doesn't feel worthy of doing so, and Ethel wonders if she's simply grown too used to being a slave. So if that's the case, he gives it to her as a direct order. The moment he does, though, one of the waiters approaches the table and informs them that the restaurant strictly prohibits slaves from sitting, and that as a luxury establishment, they only serve upper-class clientele. So he asks Ethel whether he actually has enough money to pay for the meal. Since it seems one of the staff made a mistake, as this isn't the kind of place just anyone can afford, Anastasia suggests they could just eat at a street stall outside. But Eftel tells her not to worry and shows the waiter 3 gemstones, asking if that's not enough, then pulls out a few more, just in case. The waiter is stunned, since those are dragon tears, and a single one that size is worth 500 gold coins. He immediately drops to his knees, apologizing profusely. Eftel tells him to keep the change, but that he wants all the meat they can possibly bring. The waiter's whole attitude flips instantly, and he orders the entire staff to bring the young lord and his lady friend all the food they could want and to move them straight to the VIP room. As they're led away, Ifthibel reflects that he really was given quite a bit of money for the trip, even though that money technically used to belong to his father. Once in the VIP room, faced with a massive banquet, Ifthibel notices Anastasia still looks a bit nervous. He tells her to eat, but she says it's the first time anyone has ever treated her this way, and she isn't sure a slave like her deserves to eat all of it. Eftel tells her they're going to be spending a lot of time together, so she can take that as his way of saying he's glad to have her around. He tells her to eat before it gets cold. Or does she just not like him? She assures him that isn't it at all. Eftel mentions that it's also possible he might end up treating her badly without even realizing it, and asks that if that ever happens, she let him know by showing some anger. She doesn't know what that means. Eftel realizes then that she spent so long as a slave that she forgot what it even feels like to be angry. So he explains that whenever something bothers her, it's okay to say so, she doesn't have to keep it bottled up. The two of them start practicing how to show anger though. To be honest, Anastasia isn't very good at it. The next day, the two of them arrive at the Krone Academy of Magic, where Eftel heads to registration. Before he goes, Anastasia thanks him for the clothes he bought her, and also notices just how many people are there. Eftel explains that getting into the academy is quite competitive, since graduating from a good academy guarantees a job for life, which is why so many people take the entrance exam. He also lets her know she'll have to take it too, since anyone can sign up, and if she does well, she could land a good job down the line. Anastasia wonders if she can really pull it off. Eftel, though, is more than confident, since she has far more magical potential than most humans. After all, she's a relative of Merlin's, even if a distant one. A while later, the chief examiner steps forward and announces that the first stage of the exam will be a free-for-all battle. Hearing that, Eftel gets genuinely excited. The instructor introduces himself as Franz Bauer and informs the students they'll fight until only 5 of them remain standing. Magic is allowed, as are weapons or any other method they prefer, basically. They can do whatever they want to knock out their opponents. This exam is pretty extreme. With that said, he orders 50 students into the arena, thinking to himself that this exam happens every year and that he gets paid just to watch over these kids, which honestly isn't a bad gig. He wonders if this year someone will actually stand out, since usually nobody does. Almost immediately, the students find themselves completely surrounded. After all, it's basic common sense that in a free-for-all, the weakest get eliminated first. But this time, that assumption turns out to be wrong. Within seconds, Franz is stunned to see everyone go flying out of the arena at once. Looking at Eftel, he assumes the boy must be using some kind of physical enhancement. Still, he figures it won't be that simple, since free-for-alls usually involve alliances forming to take down the strongest competitors. Everyone charges at the two of them together. Anastasia, however, uses her wind magic and blasts 16 opponents clean out of the arena in one move, leaving Franz utterly speechless. Anastasia, for her part, looks nervous and apologizes to Eftel, asking if she went overboard. He assures her it went exactly as he expected, complimenting her talent. Anastasia blushes while Eftel asks her if she really can't cast spells without an incantation. Anastasia points out that everyone knows you need an incantation to cast a spell, but he replies, that's simply not true, since if you waste time reciting an incantation, you can't pull off something like what he just did. Franz panics upon realizing the boy just performed 4 parallel activations of level 4 spells in the blink of an eye. Eftel sends everyone else flying. Franz can hardly believe it, and after that display, the two of them end up as the only finalists. Sometime later, the students sit for the written exam. For Eftel, it's laughably easy since he mastered magical theory back in his past life. The only issue is that the exam has an overwhelming number of questions. Time eventually runs out, and Anastasia asks him how it went. Eftel tells her there were way too many questions, but luckily he managed to answer all of them. Anastasia is surprised and asks if he really answered every single one. Eftel asks if he wasn't supposed to answer everything, and Anastasia tells him he's mistaken. Students were only meant to answer the questions related to their own specialty. A little later, the headmaster lets out a shout of disbelief upon realizing that one student scored 958 points, something that had never happened before in the academy's history. People start speculating that he must have cheated, and a small bald student mentions that the student's name is Eftel, sharing his name with the famous Lightning Emperor. The headmaster remarks that the boy's parents were awfully bold to give him an emperor's name, and that for anyone walking the path of magic, that borders on blasphemy. He asks the staff if they're certain the boy didn't cheat, and just then France walks in, announcing that during the first test, he personally witnessed with his own eyes what the boy could do. The headmaster lets out another shout, since most people who make it into university can't even cast a level 4 spell, let alone perform parallel activations. And he doubts even someone on the teaching staff could pull that off. France comments that based on what he saw, the boy's score on the second exam has to be legitimate. The headmaster wonders aloud whether that boy could actually be the reincarnation of the Lightning Emperor, and honestly, his theory isn't too far off the mark. Meanwhile, the students go check the results boards to find their names among those who passed. Eftel is searching for his number, 588, when he's interrupted by Anastasia, who excitedly hugs him, telling him she passed. He congratulates her, though. Since Anastasia got a little carried away with the hug, everyone starts assuming they're a couple. Embarrassed, she apologizes. However, Eftel's name doesn't appear on the board. Searching for himself, he confirms it really isn't there, which strikes Anastasia as extremely odd, since it seems impossible that someone with his talent could have failed. Eftel agrees, since he knows the exam went very well for him. He wonders if maybe they secretly tested his magical aptitude without him noticing, since, if they had, that alone could have gotten him rejected. Furious, Anastasia decides to go complain since she thinks it's completely unfair. But Eftel asks her to stop, since it would be incredibly embarrassing for him. She stops and notices a small notice posted on one of the pillars. Taking a closer look, she realizes it's an announcement stating that there's a student receiving a privileged scholarship, and that student is none other than Eftel himself. Anastasia is thrilled, while Eftel, rather confused, wonders what exactly being a representative entails and what on earth they expect him to do. A little later, after looking into it, Anastasia informs him that being a privileged student is actually really impressive. Tuition, housing, and food are all covered for free. What could be better than free food? And on top of that, he even gets a cash stipend. Eftel notes that he'll also have to participate in inter-school events and promotional activities for the academy, which makes him suspect they see him more as some kind of academy mascot. That's not at all what he had in mind. He just wanted to be able to use the library and other facilities without drawing too much attention, hoping to find ways to make progress on his magical aptitude. But now he's going to be a student representative, and he doubts he'll be able to turn it down. While walking through the halls lost in thought, he notices Merlin nearby. He's stunned, and for some reason immediately hides. He gets a bit nervous, but he's sure that's his little Merlin, who, well, isn't so little anymore, not even close, honestly. He wonders what she's doing there, since even though he's young again now, he still looks exactly the same as before. And if Merlin were to see him, she could recognize him instantly. Worse still, if anyone discovers he's a reincarnator, everything could get seriously complicated. So without wasting any time, he asks Anastasia to give him another tour of the academy. As he walks away, Merlin suddenly gets a strange feeling and turns around, calling out for her master. She knows it's impossible for her master to actually be there, but out of the corner of her eye, she catches a glimpse of Eftel and goes after him. She wonders who on earth that boy is and without hesitation steps into his path, asking him point blank if he has any connection to the Lightning Emperor. Since Eftel doesn't want to cause a scene or risk being expelled from the academy, he tells Anastasia he's hungry and the two of them dash off to eat. While they're eating, Eftel asks if she really didn't recognize him. She admits, sadly, that she didn't. And the truth is, she never actually knew him personally, since Merlin was the daughter of the Demon King, but the previous Demon King belonged to her clan 10 generations back. Eftel realizes there's a huge gap between them and that they're only related by pure coincidence, which also explains why she doesn't resemble Merlin all that much. He wonders why she's even at this school, given that she's supposedly the headmistress of the Altina Academy of Magic. A little later, everyone is brought to the great auditorium where the headmaster of Krone Academy welcomes them. He takes the opportunity to introduce a special guest, none other than Merlin, headmistress of the Altina Academy of Magic. Once she's introduced, Eftel finally understands why she's there. She addresses the students and congratulates them on their admission. Eftel breathes a sigh of relief, figuring she only came to offer her congratulations and isn't actually going to be teaching there. Still, he senses he needs to do something soon before things spiral out of control. Right then, the headmaster of Krone Academy asks the new student representative to say a few words, addressing him by name Eftel Orcott. Hearing that name, Merlin whips around instantly. Eftel panics, realizing that now that she's heard his full name, her suspicions are likely far stronger, and he notices she's glaring at him with obvious irritation. A little later, several girls approach Eftel, who thinks to himself that the situation is only getting worse. They comment on how cute, handsome, and famous he is. Meanwhile, Anastasia is fuming, sitting alone at the table, hoping her master doesn't forget that she found him first. Just then, Merlin walks up to the table, dropping a stack of papers onto it while staring at him intently. The girls get nervous and quickly say their goodbyes. Everyone wonders what's going on, and Merlin, blunt and straight to the point, tells him she's heard quite a few things about him. Eftel realizes his little student has become quite direct, and Merlin, without any preamble, asks him if he's familiar with the concept of reincarnation. Eftel grows nervous and, As he watches her, he recalls that Merlin was always sharp as a tack. He plays dumb and tells her he has no idea what she's talking about. Merlin, however, lets him know she saw his exam, and that he answered it exactly the way one of the four emperors would have, even though he'd apparently just signed up for fun. Most of the teaching staff confirmed everything on the exam was correct, but no one could understand his method for solving it. She asks if he knows why that is, but Eftel doesn't, so she tells him it's because his answers are based on magical theories from 400 years ago. She asks him to explain that, and Eftel realizes he's slipped up. Luckily, though, Merlin mentions that he reminds her a lot of someone very important to her, and apologizes for getting a little worked up whenever the topic of her master comes up. She admits that talk of reincarnation might be a stretch, but she thinks he could have some kind of connection to one of the four emperors, specifically the Lightning Emperor, and that maybe that connection is why he didn't want to talk to her. That's the conclusion she's come to on her own. Ethel replies, "Well, you got me, I did reincarnate." Or at least that's what he imagines saying. Since he obviously can't actually admit that out loud, naturally, the situation only gets more complicated as the other students start whispering about demons, emperors, and all sorts of wild theories. Eftel grows frustrated since all he ever wanted was to study magic, but then a clever idea comes to him, and he leans in to whisper a little secret to Merlin. He tells her the Lightning Emperor once had a secret lover. Merlin is stunned, while Eftel figures that if she can't accept the plain truth, he might as well give her the story she seems to want so badly. He makes up a tale about being secretly in love with a woman and how they had a son together whose magical aptitude was incredible, which led the Lightning Emperor to teach the boy everything he knew. He claims the boy stayed hidden away in a small village, living like a hermit. Merlin cuts in saying, "Hey, stop it. That story's obviously made up." But Eftel flips the script by adding that the Lightning Emperor actually died in despair after discovering he had no magical aptitude at all. Merlin silences him, pulling him against her chest as she murmurs that this was kept secret to avoid tarnishing the reputation of the four emperors, and that he'd better not say something like that out loud in front of so many people. But the very fact that she's reacting this way means the story he told her must be true. Eftel then formally introduces himself as Eftel Orcat the 13th. Inwardly apologizing for the lie, he sees that Merlin seems to accept it, and she admits it, makes her a little sad that her master never told her something so important. She accepts it, but at the same time gets excited, since she wants to find out which of them is the true heir of the Lightning Emperor, revealing that her clan isn't the only one following the path Eftel laid out, nor the only one striving to become the strongest. She adds that she's not the only one who has kept practicing his magic all these years either. Eftel is stunned to realize Merlin has been training in his magic for 400 years since that day. She tells him she's aware that, as student representative, he'll be taking part in the afternoon battles, and lets him know that during the match, she wants to compare her magic against his. Eftel panics, since doing that would draw an enormous amount of attention. And although he knows he could refuse, the truth is he doesn't want to, since he's genuinely curious to see what his former student accomplished over those 400 years.